Hi, I'm Gill Stannard. I'm a naturopath, herbalist, and mentor, and I'm back again with my good friend and mentor, Dr. Sue Evans. And we're actually back by popular demand from both herbal clinicians and herbal educators and naturopaths. And this week in Australia is Herbal Medicine Week, and I thought I'd share a conversation which kind of looks at some different aspects of, including things like how different ways that people are using their herbal knowledge. So welcome back, Sue.
Hi, Jill. Good to see you.
Recently, you wrangled a panel and attended the National Institute of Medical Herbalists online conference, one of the kind of bounties of living in lockdown. How long have you been a member of the NIMH?
Well, interestingly, that's membership of the NIMH is my only herbal qualification. So I started studying in the late 70s. I was living in the UK, and the 4-year course at that time was to prepare us to sit our membership exams for the NIMH, and that was the qualification. So yeah, so late 70s, and yeah. So I've been a member for a long time, and more recently a very interested observer of what's gone on with the National Institute for a very long time. And I think one of the joys of getting older is actually being able to put a much longer time span on whatever it is, particularly if you're lucky enough, as we are, to maintain our fascination with the same field. I think both you and I have moved into different aspects of herbal medicine over the years, but because, and this is one of the things that I love about herbal medicine, is that there are so many different areas that you can get involved with, that you can kind of change careers and still stay in herbal medicine. So you can practice, or you can teach, or you can research, or you're doing the mentoring, or you can combine with all sorts of other things. Anyway, so that's sort of by the by. So yeah, this is the second time that the National Institute has actually run their conference online because of COVID. I mean, until now, conference was always attended by, maybe, I don't know, 100 people, and it was always at this time of year, so it was difficult to get to, and yeah, it was always really small. But this time, well, I think last year and this year, I think they've had around 500 attendees from 30 countries.
Wow.
So they have actually, and they're talking, of course, everybody misses face-to-face. And the National Institute are talking about next Northern Summer, trying to have something that's face-to-face so that people can feel that. But it has just, changed conference enormously. And it's not that, because I was a participant, I didn't pay, so I can't remember how much it costs, but it's not incredibly expensive. And of course, you don't have to, have got flights and accommodation and all that kind of stuff. So then that's even, but it was really, what we were talking about last time was just the changes that have happened with the National Institute recently.
So as an outsider, as an Australian trained,
I'm on the boundary.
As a naturopath and herbalist trained in Australia, you always talked about NIMH, and it seemed very exclusive to an outsider. Has that changed over the years? Yes,
enormously. So it was, as I said, I started training in the late 70s. So, we learned to be medical herbalists, and we were, and it was only people who had done that training who could become members, and all of that. Then from, I don't know, 80s, late 80s, 90, the National Institute made a commitment along with EHPTA, European Herbal Practitioners, Traditional and Herbal Practitioners Association, something. They started really focusing on statutory regulation. Now, this was highly divisive, and I don't know that I have ever had the words or will ever get the words to express the distress that that caused some practitioners. So there were many respected practitioners who left NIMH because they didn't believe in making herbal medicine only available, or the practice only available to those people who had done a particular training. Anyway, so there was a lot of time, energy, money put in by the association over a period of probably 20 years. There were, to try and get statutory regulation, there were 7 government inquiries.
Wow.
Over that period of time. And as I said, people passionate about it. Haven't got the, I should have looked up the dates, shouldn't I?
That's all right.
So around 2010, 2012, there was an agreement to have statutory regulation, for statutory regulation to occur. But then a couple of years later, there was the final report, and that was scrapped. And so now that's been scrapped permanently, and the Institute has given up that fight. A history of that has not been, as far as I know, hasn't been written yet. And it will be interesting to see, how that pans out. Now, so that's one thing. So there was the statutory regulation. The other thing that happened kind of alongside that was that from probably the mid-90s, as I said, the National Institute had responsibility for educating future practitioners, future members, and their training program had been, what we all did. Or then universities got interested in herbal medicine, and I think at the most there were, I'm going to say 9, 11 universities taught degrees in herbal medicine.
Wow.
Then, of course, the university that was not maintained, and so when the universities took over herbal medicine education, of course, the institute ceased their training program because, it made more sense for universities to do this. But then, of course, by 2010, 2012, that had ceased, right? And so now there's one herbal medicine course associated with Lincoln University, but really universities have got out of herbal medicine education, which of course leaves a crisis for the professional association, because if you don't have education, you don't have a future. If there's no way for new people to train, then your profession is going to die.
And it's worth probably pointing out for Australian or other overseas viewers is that in Australia, herbal medicine is now unfortunately very rarely taught on its own, or it's in part of a naturopathic degree, usually by private, big education, as I call it. So which, and naturopathy has never had that toehold in the UK. Herbal medicine has been the traditional medicine. Yeah.
And I think yes, certainly private colleges here have been established, certainly in the education of naturopathy, have been very well established for a number of decades. I mean, Southern School recently had, what was it? So
oh yeah, I won a hamper. I don't remember what it was. It 50 years, 70, 50 years?
Yeah. So 1960 to 2021. So it's the 60 years. So it's been there's been an established private education in Australia, which has its own pros and cons, but there's established private education here, which did not happen in the UK. So these two things, the loss of statutory regulation plus the reorganisation of education, meant that the professional association that I'd been associated with for so long obviously was going through a real crisis of confidence, identity. What was amazing about this conference, getting back to the conference last week or the week before, was to just see it's like new green shoots, like to see how the Institute is moving on from that and is starting to reimagine itself, I suppose. And what I see with that is a new inclusivity and a moving away, a much stronger focus this time on what they would call community herbalism. So a lot of discussion. So just looking at the presentations were, yes, there were some clinical presentations, but and there were a number of presentations, as we mentioned in our conversation last week, on how does one make a living as a herbalist.
Yes, so business. It's great to see business on the agenda more and more.
Yes, business was on the agenda.
Yeah.
But also a lot of stuff. Well, a major presentation by Anne Armbrecht about sustainability. A wonderful presentation by Annie McIntyre about her garden, and then some really inspiring presentations about how people are using their herbal knowledge in community areas, whether that's in education of young kids, primary school age kids, or whether that's as part of community gardens. And just very, and also just seeing whereas National Institute had been very, very protective of, I suppose, of its own educational standards. Now seeing a much broader cooperation between all sorts of people who and this between large and small herbal organisations with different approaches to education and to herbal medicine, understanding that there are herbal concerns that we all have. That we all have to take responsibility for, and a lot of that, of course, is around climate and sustainability and our supply chains. I feel like I'm rambling.
No. I find it really fascinating, both as a clinician and a herbalist. And my degree before I did naturopathy was in politics and history, so I've always, like you, had a really political and historical slant. I think we can learn from history so we're not doomed to repeat it. But that was quite a change to the flavour of a lot of the professional conferences still in Australia. So at some point, science became king.
Yes.
And the plants that perhaps were queen got a bit of a lower ranking, but and was, because I know you used to go sometimes to the UK to the in-person conference.
Yeah. I've lost your voice. Okay.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can. Yes.
Okay. So what else? It's also, apologies. I live in the inner city where there is constantly noise going on outside, and whatever time I choose, there'll be noise. So what I'm saying is that about this whole science, how the importance of science, was that something that in previous NIMH conferences that you used to travel across the world to go to in person, was science ever as prominent as it has been in recent decades here?
Well, I think probably not as much as, for example, NHAA conferences. And I mean, one of the things that is quite interesting at the moment, there was the NIM conference a couple of weeks ago. The Canadian conference is coming up, and one of the panels in the Canadian conference, David Castleton, who's the president of NHAA, is talking on a panel around statutory regulation, so around regulation. And of course, David is very pro-regulation. So it's interesting that this issue is alive around around the herbal world. I think also it's interesting to look at the changes in name. So I trained as a medical herbalist. Soon after that, the School of Herbal Medicine became the School of Herbal Medicine in brackets phytotherapy, right?
Ah, yes.
Then there was another association apart from NIM was set up that was the College of Practitioners for Phytotherapy. And so for a while, I think even the NHAA journal was the Journal of Phytotherapy for a while, wasn't it?
Yes. Yeah.
And then of course there was the move to Western herbal medicine, right? And this term Western herbal medicine, as opposed to herbal medicine, came in, I think, because particularly in the UK, practitioners were trying to differentiate themselves from Chinese herbal medicine. Now there's a question about whether the term Western herbal medicine is appropriate in these days of decolonisation, and also an acknowledgement that the materia medica that we use comes from around the globe. It's not purely Western herbs. So I think overall, look, I think that I used to. I have travelled for conferences. I haven't been to too many of the National Institute conferences, but those have been quite clinically focused. And I think, that certainly there was a change in the focus, but also, conference was always much. Well, you couldn't have as many presentations because it was a small conference and limited time. Whereas with an online conference, you can have a number of streams because you leave. I think that most of us have got access to the conference recordings for 6 months, after the conference. So if you can listen to all of the presentations that are generally presented concurrently. You don't have the problem with although of course you miss out on
the juicy stuff, the conversations.
Yes,
so I found it really interesting when I did look, when you pointed me to the program, that there was comparatively few presentations about conditions.
Yes.
Or about a herb, or certainly nothing about a chemical constituent, which we still have quite a focus on in Australia, but more about business, which is also most associations around the world in naturopathy and herbal medicine are definitely focusing on that, which as a mentor gladdens my heart. But there's, the real standout to me, as you've touched on, is this community herbal medicine or herbalism, and different ways that people who are trained in herbal medicine are using their knowledge. Do you want to share any other examples of things that came up?
Well, there's Hackney Herbals, which you can look up online, which a lot of these seem to grow like topsy. Started out with somebody trying to connect with a community garden because they moved into a new area, and then bringing their skills and, that moving to, focusing programs on particularly underserved communities and connecting people who there's something in the UK where they identified loneliness as a major health issue some years ago, and so people who are isolated can get referrals to particular programs, which means then that programs are identified, and so some of these programs that involve herbal medicine are in a broader context of connecting people with nature, and helping people identify the plants in their area and that sort of thing. The other program, which was such a complete joy to see, was, I think it's, I wasn't particularly attracted by the name, and it was called something called Junior Herbalist, which didn't attract me. But in terms of the content of the thing, it was like, okay, so Herbalists, this is a program where herbalists have a session a month of 2 hours out of school time, focused on 8 to 12-year-olds, where they teach the 8 to 12-year-olds about plants, and particularly about medicinal plants, and it's making things, you know. So they'll, you know, they'll have, you know, hire a hall or whatever. So this is like, this is an extracurricular activity, you know, which is something that the herbalists themselves can make money from. And they teach the kids, and so there might be, you know, making lozenges or making ointments or whatever. But it's quite structured, and you know, there'll be worksheets, and there'll be, you know, okay, so, you know, what's the common name of Levantula officinalis, and what's the part used? And the kids have just spent the last half hour taking the flower heads off the lavender stalks, and so they know that the part used is this. And so then, you know, what are some of the things that it might be used for? Because they've, you know, the kids have made it into, so they'll make bath bombs, and they'll make ointments, and they'll make lozenges, and, you know, over, you know, they do 10 sessions over the year. Now, the Professional Association has taken this on now. So this is not something, because it's teaching kids how to use particular plants, this is not something that teachers can do, you know. Like, this is something that you need to be a trained herbalist to be able to do, because you need to be able to identify the plants, and you need to be able to work out, you know, how to what appropriate preparations are. And, you know, so they'll make, you know, elderberry robs, and they'll make, you know, whatever is in season. Oh, and one thing that I loved, that I've been looking around, but I left it a bit later, I think, in Melbourne, well, inner city Melbourne, they were weaving things out of cleavers. So getting, you know, just making little, you know,
crowns,
crowns and baskets and stuff. And it's like, because of course, you know, once you've woven something out of cleavers, you're never going to not know what cleavers is.
No.
You know, once you've separated out the flower head from the lavender stalk, like, this is knowledge that is going to go into you deeply. You know, of course, you know, 8 to 12-year-olds, you know, love making things.
And following on from a popular thing that you have talked about at conferences, is it sounds quite organoleptic, you know, like they're smelling, they're tasting, they're touching. It's wonderful. And I'd like Herb Club. I mean, gosh, I would have loved Herb Club at that age.
Yes. And so this was started by one member in the Institute, and it's now, you know, the Institute is rolling it out and training other new herbalists to as a secondary stream, you know, to their income, but also, you know, because somebody has actually done the work in the first place, and has worked out the worksheets and the permission forms, and, you know, what you can do and what you can't do in terms of all this. So that was an incredibly inspiring presentation.
And that also ties into, you know, I'd say in the last 8 or so years here in Australia, is there's both a public and a professional craving for more grassroots stuff. As learning the herbs have been so classroom based, I'm finding practitioners of all years of experience have just been really craving getting in touch with the plants again, making medicines.
Yes,
and the public too.
Yes, all ages. I mean, as you know, just behind, I live in an apartment block in Brunswick, in Melbourne. Just behind me is a new park. We've got a community garden there. Just before we were meeting, Jill, I had a coffee and took it down in the sunshine in the park. And I was sitting in the herb garden, and a couple of little kids, I mean, they would have been preschoolers, came up and somehow associated me with it. I mean, maybe people see me, you know, and so I was showing them, so there was a new basil seedling, and just showing them, you know, okay, if you just rub the leaf and then smell it. And of course, you know, their mums are saying, oh, well, we can't identify tomato and basil, but, you know, you can. But just like, there's always, I mean, people just love that accessibility of you know, smelling the plants and seeing how they grow, and just so it's there's enormous I think, and it's part of this, that we all have this need to connect more solidly with the world around us, you know, and with the plants around us, and being able to identify plants, I think, is one of the ways that we show respect for them.
And I think that's a perfect time and a wind up too for Herbal Medicine Week, which is not just for herbalists or not just for naturopaths. It's about encouraging everyone to connect with their plants. So perhaps for anyone who's not in the profession, if you are wanting more information like this, start asking. And I know there are many, many talented people in every stage who would love to share this knowledge in an accessible way. I certainly cut my teeth as a new grad in the early 1990s doing neighbourhood centre classes and community classes, and there would always be a multi-week home healing. We would do poulticing. I'd make cough syrups, lozenges, all foot baths, and how you can use herbs. I mean, using herbs in a foot bath or a whole bath is just like a gateway for people to get to use herbs. But, you know, if you're hearing the call as a professional, as just somebody who's interested in herbs, I think this is the time to make it happen. Whether what's happening in the UK is heralding our future, or we're riding ahead of them, I don't know. But I mean, the more people understand the plants, the more herbalists there will be.
Absolutely. Yes, and growing, looking after our supply chains, knowing where things are coming from is the other aspect of that. But as herbalists, we have a responsibility to the plant world.
We're the custodians of the plant world.
Yes.
Yeah. So it's been a pleasure, as always, to record some of our rants and our love of our plants. And if you're watching this and you enjoyed it, please hit the like button and subscribe if you want to find other conversations around this. And if you've got any comments, put a comment in. If you're interested in teaching or learning about some grassroots herbalism, let's start a movement. So thanks very much, and we may or may not be back in the future, so keep an eye on those subscriptions. See you soon.